"We're terminating your contract for cause, Frank. You get nothing." Ryan Garrison tossed the printed email chain on the mahogany table, looking like he had already won. I looked at the paper, then at the HR director who was staring at the floor. It was a complete setup. The Michigan Avenue lease was scheduled to be signed in 72 hours, and my commission was $270,000. Ryan thought he was clever. He had no idea what he had actually triggered. 9 months earlier, the project didn't even have a name. 9 months ago, none of this existed. To the board of Apex Outdoor Goods, Michigan Avenue was just a line item on an aggressive expansion deck. To me, it was a beast I had to tame. I've been a leasing director for 22 years. I don't deal in promises or handshakes. I deal in triple net leases, square footage, and escalator clauses. I know exactly how much foot traffic passes a storefront at 3 on a rainy Tuesday, and I know which landlords will squeeze you for common area maintenance charges and which ones will play fair. Richard Garrison, the founder, had built Apex from a single store in Wisconsin into a regional powerhouse. He was old school. He understood that a retail brand lives and dies by its flagship locations. He trusted me. When he told me we needed a presence in Chicago, I knew there was only one space that would work: the old historical building owned by Vance Properties. The problem was the rent. Arthur Vance, the billionaire patriarch, who owned half the River North District, didn't need our money. He had institutional tenants lining up to pay $180 a square foot, plus triple net expenses. If Apex paid that rate, our margins would be paper, then before we even opened the doors. I spent 3 months just getting a meeting with Arthur's team. I didn't send them shiny brochures. I sent them a detailed 50-page prospectus on how our premium demographic would elevate the surrounding blocks, driving high-end retail traffic to his other adjacent properties. When I finally sat down with Arthur Vance at his private club, he didn't want to talk about spreadsheets. He wanted to talk about execution. He'd seen too many retail brands sign massive leases, burn through their capital on bad build-outs, and default within 3 years. I told him, "Arthur, I'm personally supervising the tenant improvement phase. I've worked with Marcus Thorne as our general contractor for a decade. We don't run over budget, and we don't miss deadlines." Arthur looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "If you're running the show, Frank, I'll give you the space. But only if you are the one holding the wheel." That was how I got the rate down to $120 a square foot. Over a 10-year term on 15,000 square feet, that simple discount represented a $9 million saving for Apex. On top of that, I secured a $1.2 million tenant improvement allowance to cover the interior construction. It was the deal of a lifetime, but I wasn't naive. I've seen family-run businesses turn sour when the second generation tries to play corporate tycoon. Richard Garrison was getting ready to step back, and his son, Ryan, was waiting in the wings with an MBA from a third-tier business school and a burning need to prove he was the smartest man in the room. Ryan had already started bringing in his own people, replacing veteran operations managers with cheap consultants who spoke in corporate buzzwords. So during the final lease drafts, I made sure my attorney, Evelyn Drake, inserted a specific clause. It was Clause 14F. On paper, it looked like standard boilerplate, a key man tenant representative designation. It stated that the negotiated lease rate and the tenant improvement allowance were contingent upon my active, personal supervision of the build-out as the designated tenant representative. If I was removed from that role, Vance Properties reserved the right to nullify the lease or adjust the rate to standard market terms. To Ryan, it probably looked like standard legal noise. To me, it was my insurance policy. Meanwhile, we had to prepare the marketing engine. You don't open a flagship store on Michigan Avenue quietly. We hired Linda Rossi's agency to handle the launch. Linda is the best media buyer in the Midwest. She booked billboard spots, local television ads, and social media takeovers, all synchronized for a grand opening on November 1st, right before the holiday shopping rush. The total media buy was $1.5 million, fully prepaid and completely non-refundable. If we missed that date, the ads would run anyway, pointing customers to a locked, empty storefront. By late September, the lease was ready for execution. My employment contract was clear. I was entitled to a 1.5% acquisition commission on the total value of any long-term lease I secured. On an $18 million lease, that came out to $270,000. It was a massive payout, one I'd earned through 9 months of 70-hour work weeks and endless legal battles. I had the final execution draft, sitting on my desk on a Thursday morning. Construction permits were approved, Marcus Thorne's crews were ready to break ground, and Linda's ad campaign was locked in. Everything was aligned then. I received a calendar invite from Sarah Sterling, the HR director. The subject line was blank. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. In corporate real estate, a blank HR invite at 4 p.m. on a Friday only means one thing. The HR conference room on the 9th floor was too bright. It had floor-to-ceiling glass walls, designed to look transparent, but the blinds were drawn. Sarah Sterling sat on one side of the mahogany table, a thick blue folder open in front of her. Ryan Garrison sat next to her, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against a yellow legal pad. He didn't look up when I walked in. He was wearing his favorite bespoke gray suit, looking like a man who had already won. "Have a seat, Frank," Sarah said. Her voice had that practiced, neutral tone HR people use when they're about to ruin your life. I sat down. I didn't take my hands out of my pockets. I didn't offer a polite smile. I've sat in enough negotiations to know when the other side has already made their decision. Ryan stopped tapping his pen. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Frank, we have a compliance issue, a severe one." Sarah slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a printed email chain. I looked at it. It was an email from my assistant sending standard lease drafts to an external commercial brokerage. Attached were the NNN cost breakdowns, the CAM projections, and the draft of Clause 14F. "This is a direct violation of Section 8 of your employment agreement," Sarah said, pointing a manicured finger at the printout. "Specifically, the clause regarding the unauthorized sharing of proprietary financial projections during active lease negotiations." I looked at the email address. It was standard procedure. Ryan's own operations team had requested those files 3 weeks ago to verify utility layouts, and my assistant had copied the landlord's brokers to ensure everyone had the latest architectural revisions. It was a routine administrative CC. There was no leak. There was no secret broker. It was standard industry flow. I looked at Ryan. "Your team requested this, Ryan. You were copied on the original thread." Ryan smiled. It was a small, tight expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't recall that, Frank. And even if my team needed it, your assistant sent proprietary CAM projections to a third-party domain without a signed NDA addendum. That's a breach of fiduciary duty. It's a termination for cause." I let the silence hang in the room. I've negotiated leases with hardened Chicago street-smart landlords who would steal the gold out of your teeth. But Ryan was different. He was clumsy. He was trying to use a minor administrative protocol as a cudgel to save $270,000. "So," I said, keeping my voice even, "you're firing me." "We are terminating your contract, effective immediately," Sarah corrected, sliding a second document over. "Under Section 12, termination for cause invalidates any pending commissions, including the Michigan Avenue acquisition bonus." There it was, the real motive. The lease was scheduled for signature on Monday. If I was on the payroll on Monday, the $270,000 was legally mine. If they cut me loose on Friday afternoon, they could claim the deal was closed by someone else. Specifically, Chloe Garrison, who had been shadowing me for the past month under the guise of learning the ropes. Ryan leaned back, crossing his legs. "Look, Frank, we want to be reasonable. We know you've put in the hours. If you sign this voluntary release and waive your claim to the acquisition bonus, we'll transition this into a mutual separation. We'll give you 2 weeks severance, and I'll personally sign a neutral reference for your next gig." It's a fair exit. He was offering me a crumb of my own bread. He wanted me to sign away $250,000 in exchange for a couple of weeks of hush money. He wanted to make sure I couldn't sue them for the commission. I picked up the documents. I read every line slowly. Sarah and Ryan watched me, waiting for the outburst. They expected me to argue, to threaten to call Richard, to make a scene. But I've learned that anger is a waste of leverage. I stood up, leaving the release agreement unsigned on the mahogany table. I folded the termination notice and put it in my breast pocket. "Understood," I said. Ryan blinked. He looked disappointed. He wanted a fight, or at least a negotiation. "That's it? You're not going to sign? I'll have my attorney review the termination terms," I said calmly. "Frank, if you walk out that door without signing, the severance offer is off the table," Sarah warned. "And we will contest any claim for unemployment." "I heard you," I said. I walked out of the conference room and down the quiet carpeted hallway to my office. It was 4:30. The corporate floor was mostly empty. People were already heading out for the weekend. I grabbed my leather briefcase from the chair. I didn't need to pack much. My personal files were already backed up. I took the silver-framed photo of Richard Garrison and me standing in front of our Denver store 10 years ago, back when Apex was run by men who kept their word. I took my solid brass scale rule, a gift from my father when I started in commercial real estate. As I walked past the glass doors of the retail development suite, I saw Chloe Garrison. She was standing in the center of the office, gesturing to two maintenance workers. "We'll move the mahogany desk against the window," she was saying, her voice carrying through the open doorway. "And get rid of these filing cabinets. I want a clean look." She didn't see me. I didn't stop. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The security guard, an old guy named Arthur, who had worked the desk for 15 years, nodded as I walked toward the revolving doors. "Have a good weekend, Mr. Bennett," he said. "You too, Artie," I replied. I stepped out into the crisp autumn air of Chicago. The wind was picking up, blowing dry leaves across the pavement. I got into my sedan, started the engine, and sat there for a minute, looking at the towering corporate headquarters of Apex Outdoor Goods in my rearview mirror. They thought they had saved $270,000. They had no idea what they had just cost themselves. The Union League Club of Chicago is the kind of place where decisions are made before they ever reach a boardroom. It has dark oak paneling, leather chairs that smell of beeswax, and a strict no-phones policy. I sat in the corner booth of the third-floor library, a glass of 20-year-old scotch in my hand. Across from me sat Arthur Vance, Marcus Thorne, and Linda Rossi. They had all responded to my text within 10 minutes. "They did what?" Marcus growled, his thick hands gripping the edge of the table. Marcus was a third-generation builder. His face was weathered from decades on Chicago job sites, and he had no patience for corporate double dealers. "You've spent 9 months living on that site, Frank. I've already got 2 crews scheduled to pull wire on Monday morning. They terminated my contract at 4 p.m. today," I said, taking a slow sip. "Cited a confidentiality breach, some routine email my assistant sent to your engineering team. Ryan Garrison wants to save the $270,000 commission. He's putting his wife in the seat on Monday." Arthur Vance let out a dry, rattling laugh. He was 68 years old, worth about $2 billion in commercial assets, and he didn't care about Ryan Garrison's MBA. "Richard's boy is a fool," Arthur said, shaking his head. "I didn't give Apex that space because I liked their outdoor gear, Frank. I gave it to them because you were running the project. I know your numbers. I know your timeline, and I know you don't cut corners. I don't know this Ryan, and I certainly don't know his wife." Arthur reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a leather-bound notepad. "Evelyn," he said, gesturing to the corner of the room. Evelyn Drake, our shared legal counsel, stepped out of the shadow of the bookshelf. She was holding a folder. She had been my lawyer for 12 years and Arthur's for 10. "We're executing Clause 14 on Monday morning at 8 a.m., Evelyn said, sitting down next to Linda. "I've already drafted the notice of default. The lease agreement that Ryan Garrison thinks he's signing on Monday is contingent on Frank Bennett's active, personal designation as the tenant representative. Since Frank is no longer with the company, the landlord is exercising his right of rescission. What does that mean for their rate?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It means the deal is dead," Evelyn said flatly. "If they want the Michigan Avenue space, they'll have to sign a new lease at the standard market rate. That's $180 a square foot. No tenant improvement allowance. The $1.2 million credit we negotiated is revoked." I did the math in my head. At 15,000 square feet, that increased their rent by $900,000 a year. Over a 10-year lease, that was $9 million in additional rent, plus the lost $1.2 million construction credit. That was a $10.2 million penalty for trying to cheat me out of $250,000. "I'm pulling my men," Marcus Thorne said, leaning forward, "and I'm locking the doors. The city building permits were issued under Frank's name as the designated project director. Without him, the site is out of compliance. If I keep working, my insurance is voided. I'll chain the entrance on Monday morning at 7 a.m. "What about the materials you ordered?" I asked. "I've already paid $500,000 for the custom white oak timber and the Italian light fixtures," Marcus said, his eyes narrowing. "The invoices were approved under your signature, Frank. Since the company is terminating your authority, I'm filing a mechanic's lien against the property on Monday afternoon. That locks their asset. They can't bring in another contractor, and they can't move a single box until they pay me in full." Linda Rossi smiled. It was the smile of a media buyer who had spent 20 years placing high-stakes ad campaigns. And the marketing clock is ticking, she said. The grand opening campaign is locked. I've got $1.5 million in non-refundable ad buys scheduled to go live on October 15th. Billboards, transit stops, local television spots. If the store isn't open by November 1st, they'll be spending $50,000 a day advertising a locked door. Can Ryan pull the ads? I asked. Not without losing the entire deposit, Linda said. The cancellation window closed last Friday. On Monday morning, the automatic ACH payment of $750,000 for the second half of the campaign will clear their account. I'm not going to remind Ryan's finance team about it. I'll let the billing run. Evelyn Drake tapped the folder on the table. By 9 a.m. on Monday, Apex will have no lease, a padlocked flagship site, a $500,000 lien on their construction, and a $1.5 million advertising campaign telling the whole city to visit a store that doesn't exist. Arthur Vance raised his glass toward me. Here's to family businesses, Frank. They always make the best deals for us. We clinked our glasses. I looked out the window of the club, down at the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. I had spent 22 years playing the corporate game by the rules. I had survived 3 recessions, 2 corporate buyouts, and a dozen bad managers. Ryan Garrison thought he was playing chess. He was about to find out what happens when you try to play on a board you don't own. Monday morning arrived with the kind of quiet clarity you only get when a storm has passed, or when a trap is about to spring. I spent my morning at a small bistro on the Gold Coast, eating a soft-boiled egg and reading the Wall Street Journal. My phone was sitting face down on the marble table. It didn't buzz until 8:15. The first call was from a blocked number. Ryan's direct line. I ignored it. At 8:20 it buzzed again. This time it was my former assistant, her voice frantic when I picked up. "Frank, thank God you answered," she whispered. "The 9th floor is in complete meltdown. Ryan and Chloe arrived at 8 to do a walkthrough of the new office layout, and then the phones started ringing. The foreman from the Michigan Avenue site called. He said Marcus Thorne's crews showed up at 7, but only to pack their tools into their trucks. They padlocked the gates, chained the doors, and taped a giant notice on the window saying the site was closed due to permit suspension. Marcus apparently filed a mechanic's lien first thing this morning. The city inspectors are already there, saying the building permit is invalid because your name was on it as the designated director. I'm not the director anymore, I said calmly, taking a bite of my toast. Ryan made that very clear on Friday. There's more, she said, her voice shaking. A courier just delivered a formal notice from Vance Properties' legal department. They've locked the outer building doors. The security guards won't let our project managers near the site. The letter says the lease draft is null and void under Clause 14 F. Chloe is crying in the hallway, and Ryan is throwing folders. And Frank, Richard Garrison is on his way here. He caught an early flight from Eagle River. He's calling a special board meeting at 10. Thanks for the update, I said. Have a good week. I hung up and turned my phone back face down. By 10:30, the notifications were stacking up. 6 missed calls from Ryan, 3 from Sarah Sterling in HR, 2 from Richard Garrison's personal secretary. I didn't answer any of them. I had spent 20 years being the guy who answered the phone at midnight to solve their emergencies. Today, I was just a private citizen enjoying a second cup of coffee. At 11, I walked over to Evelyn Drake's office on Wacker Drive. Her corner office overlooked the Chicago River, the water a muddy green under the autumn sun. Evelyn was sitting at her desk, typing on her laptop. She didn't look up when I walked in. Ryan Garrison called my office 4 times in the last hour, Evelyn said, a faint smile touching her lips. He tried to threaten me first. Said they'd sue Marcus Thorne for breach of contract and take Arthur Vance to arbitration. I let him talk for about 5 minutes. Then I sent him a PDF of the signed letter of intent and the final lease draft, with Clause 14 highlighted in bright yellow. I also attached the receipts for the automatic ACH transfer that cleared their bank account at 8 early this morning. $750,000 to Linda Rossi's agency. How did he react? I asked, sitting in the leather armchair. He went quiet, Evelyn said. Then his father Richard took the phone. Richard is old school. He knows how to read a contract. He asked me what it would take to make this go away. I told him we could schedule a meeting for 3 p.m. today, but only if Ryan and the company's general counsel were present. I told him our terms were drafted and were not subject to redlining. While we were talking, the news was already hitting the retail trade publications. Linda Rossi's team had released the grand opening schedule. The local papers were running articles about Apex Outdoor Goods' upcoming flagship opening on Michigan Avenue, complete with rendering photos and quotes from the marketing campaign. The advertisements on the CTA buses were already rolling through the loop. The whole city was being told that a massive, state-of-the-art outdoor experience was opening on November 1st. But on Michigan Avenue, the reality was very different. I walked down to the site at noon. The historic stone facade looked magnificent, but the heavy glass doors were chained shut with thick steel links and a brass padlock. A bright orange sticker from the Chicago Department of Buildings was slapped across the glass, declaring the site out of compliance due to the absence of a designated licensed representative. A copy of Marcus Thorne's Mechanic's Lien for $500,000 was taped right next to it, visible to every pedestrian walking down the busiest shopping district in the Midwest. Ryan Garrison's car, a black Mercedes SUV, was idling near the curb. Ryan was standing on the pavement, his tie loose, his collar damp with sweat despite the chilly air. He was pleading with two building inspectors who were holding clipboards and ignoring him. He saw me standing across the street. For a second, I thought he was going to walk over, but he stopped, looked at the chained doors, then at his phone, and got back into his SUV. He had spent his whole life believing that money and a family name could buy him out of any corner. He was about to learn that in the real world of Chicago commercial real estate, the rules are written in ink, and the men who enforce them don't care who your father is. At 3 p.m., the boardroom at Drake & Associates was silent. The only sound was the hum of the climate control and the occasional rustle of paper. Richard Garrison sat at the head of the long glass table, his hands folded. He looked older than he had 9 months ago, his shoulders slightly hunched. Next to him, Ryan sat with his eyes fixed on a scratch pad, his posture stiff. Thomas Miller, the company's general counsel, was reviewing the document packet Evelyn Drake had laid out. I sat on the opposite side, my hands resting on the arms of my leather chair. Next to me sat Marcus Thorne, wearing his clean work shirt, and Evelyn Drake, who looked as sharp and professional as a scalpel. Thomas Miller sighed, laying the papers down. He looked at Richard. "The math is clear, Richard. Under the terms of the original employment contract and the key man clause in the lease draft, Apex has no legal standing. If we go to court, the lien stays in place. The city will keep the permit suspended, and the lease is officially terminated. We'll lose the $1.5 million advertising spend, the $500,000 in custom materials, and the Michigan Avenue location permanently." Richard didn't look at his lawyer. He looked at his son. "Do you have anything to say, Ryan?" Richard's voice was low, flat, and cold. Ryan swallowed, his throat moving. He didn't look up. "I was trying to optimize the acquisition cost. The commission structure was. You were trying to steal from the man who built our retail network." Richard interrupted, his voice rising slightly, just enough to show the anger underneath. "You thought you could write off 20 years of loyalty with a fake HR violation to save a few pennies. Instead, you've cost us $1 million in immediate liabilities and $10 million over the life of the lease." Richard turned his gaze back to me. "Frank, I'm sorry. I should have kept my hand on the rudder." "I appreciate that, Richard," I said. "But the terms are on the table." Evelyn tapped the document. "We require 3 things to resolve this today. First, immediate wire transfer of the $270,000 in earned commissions. Second, $150,000 in severance and damages for wrongful termination. Third, immediate payment of $500,000 to construction to cover the custom materials and release the lien. Additionally, we require a signed, written statement from the board retracting all allegations of confidentiality breach, with a copy placed in Frank's permanent record." Richard reached for his pen. "Draw up the wire authorizations, Thomas. I'll sign them now. Dad, we can't just—" Ryan started, but Richard cut him off with a single look. "You're done, Ryan," Richard said. "As of 4 p.m. today, you are suspended from your role as Chief Operating Officer. The board will vote on your replacement tomorrow morning. You and Chloe can pack your offices tonight. Thomas will draft your separation terms." Ryan's face went white. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, and walked out of the room without saying another word. Richard signed the documents in a quick, steady hand. He pushed them across the glass table to Evelyn. "The wires will clear by noon tomorrow, Frank," Richard said, standing up and shaking my hand. "I wish you the best." You too, Richard, I said. By Tuesday afternoon, my bank account showed the wire transfers had cleared. Marcus Thorne had received his 500,000, and the mechanic's lien on the Michigan Avenue storefront was officially released. The orange permit suspension stickers were scraped off the glass, and Marcus's crews were back inside, pulling wire and installing the custom white oak fixtures. But I wasn't there to supervise them. On Wednesday morning, I walked into the lobby of the Vance Tower on Wacker Drive. I took the express elevator to the 40th floor. The double doors opened into a lobby of polished marble and glass, overlooking the loop and the river. Arthur Vance was waiting for me in his corner office. He pointed to the desk by the window. "Your new home, Frank," Arthur said, offering me a cigar. "Senior Vice President of Commercial Acquisitions. Your base salary is 50% higher than what Apex was paying you, and you'll get a half point on every acquisition we close in the River North District." I sat in the leather chair, looking out at the city below. The Chicago River wound like a ribbon between the skyscrapers, and in the distance I could see the roof of the Michigan Avenue flagship. I placed my solid brass scale rule on the dark walnut desk. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was hot, fresh, and tasted like victory. I had spent my life building value for other men, believing that the corporate ladder was a climb toward respect. In the end, I had to build my own platform to find it. I watched the traffic moving along Michigan Avenue. 40 floors below, the game was still going on. But this time, I was the one holding the keys.